name is Steve Kuncewicz. I'm a partner at BLM. I'm part of BLM's brand new sports team, and that's what we're going to talk to you about today in the first of what we hope is going to be many vlogs talking about how we can help clubs, how we can help players, and how we can support the wider sector. And I'm delighted to be joined by my partner, Julian Cox, who is the more attractive face you can see on this recording. Hi, Julian.
Hi, Steve. You're too modest.
Oh, I don't know. I can always work on that. So listen, we're really keen to start feeding out what we hope is some really useful content for the wider sector. We're going to try and keep it as short and snappy as we can,
Yes.
to help you build what we're referring to as the game plan in a triumph of original sports marketing. But Julian is a partner in our London employment team. And I suppose, Julian, the first question I have to ask you is, if you're a club in particular, what do you need to be thinking about right now, given that we're in lockdown number 3 in relation to their staffing requirements and the ongoing pandemic?
Yeah, lockdown 3, the return of lockdown. Well, there's no doubt that these continue to be challenging time for football and rugby clubs, with the UK in its 3rd national lockdown and fixtures taking place effectively behind closed doors for the most part, leading to a more substantive and longer lasting reduction in revenue for clubs than they initially hoped. Now, that severe impact of COVID-19 means that for many clubs, their current staffing model is just simply not commercially viable any longer. So there are a number of urgent actions that I think I would recommend that clubs ought to be thinking about right now in terms of their staff so they can plan effectively for the future. They include reviewing staffing requirements and levels, deciding whether it's viable to continue to furlough staff, making redundancies where necessary, and fourthly, considering implementing changes to terms and conditions of employment as a means of avoiding maybe having to make redundancies, so thinking a little bit more agilely, a bit more creatively. Now, we hope that by following these steps, it will help clubs manage staff costs, and by doing so in turn, will not only help them weather the current storm, but also as to ensure that once lockdown has lifted and restrictions are eased and the crowds start to return, that they are operating in a sustainable and a responsible way going forward.
In terms of that sustainability and things they need to do, we hear very often, I think, that employment law is all about process. So as far as you're concerned, what does that review that you mentioned look like? Well, how do you review your staffing requirements effectively and legally and practically?
Well, that's a good question. As a first step, as part of our recommended action plan, we'd recommend that clubs, if they haven't done so already, should commence an exercise to identify any roles within the club that are not essential going forward and where cost savings can be made at all levels across the organisation. So that's not just playing staff, but it would be management, part of the administration team, marketing as well, so that they can be need to cut their cloth accordingly, so that they can be more muscular going forward as we emerge from lockdown, life after lockdown.
Well, every club wants to get itself more muscular, and so do its players, I suppose. But we've heard a lot about furlough. It's obviously a very welcome lifeline economically from the Chancellor. Yeah. But when you're having to make these hard decisions at the sharp end, what kind of basis does a club need to be looking at when it's figuring out whether or not they should be continuing to furlough their staff?
Yeah, well, the Chancellor's decision to extend the furlough scheme until the 30th of April this year was precisely intended to prevent employers from having to take drastic steps of making job losses. Now, this, of course, is a lifeline for clubs where they've identified a role as being integral to the future of the club, and they don't want to have to dismiss employees. The extension led to a reduction in a number of redundancies being planned at the end of last year, according to the Insolvency Service data published in December 2020. So that's a good thing. But with the new variant of the virus spreading with alarming rapidity, leading to another national lockdown, and that delaying the return of clubs to fixtures until the spring at the earliest, if not longer, depending on which politician you talk to, there is an argument, I would say, for saying that continuing to furlough staff where they've already identified they don't need that individual is merely prolonging the pain. let's not forget, of course, that staff continue to be a cost to the club even during furlough, because employers continue to be responsible for paying national insurance and pensions contributions while staff are on furlough.
No, that's true. And you mentioned sort of taking the what could be a very painful step for both sides and moving to redundancy. If you're a club that's decided to do that and to take that step, again, we hear that that's very much process driven. So what do they need to be thinking about? What do they need to be doing?
Yeah, quite a few things at play, particularly given the sector. It's a high profile sector, so it's really important from the perspective of good employment practice and to avoid adverse publicity that clubs are seen to be dealing with what I think everyone recognises is a very difficult and upsetting situation involving dedicated staff sensitively. I mean, for a lot of clubs, they regard their employees as part of the family.
Yeah.
It's equally important from a legal perspective that proper procedures are followed, and that includes ensuring that it is a genuine redundancy situation, essentially that the role is disappearing or is likely to do so in the imminent future, that they're adopting a fair selection criteria in deciding who should be earmarked for potential redundancy, and then procedurally there's three elements to procedurally fair redundancy under the case law. Giving warning of potential redundancy is the first step, and then entering into consultation period with the affected employees individually. If there are more than 20 employees affected or involved, then they need to look at their collective consultation responsibilities also. So that would involve additional consultation of at least a month, depending on the number of employees involved. And then finally, and as a final step, giving notice of termination. You need to go through all of those hurdles before you get to the finish line. And it's particularly important with any staff that have got over 2 years service that you do so. Well, why? Well, 2 years is the magic qualification period to have unfair dismissal rights. It's a sobering fact that the maximum compensatory award for a single claim of unfair dismissal is the lower of a year's salary or the maximum statutory limit, and currently that stands at an eye-watering £88,519.
So spinning out of that, I suppose when we get to the end of furlough, and we've seen a few of these claims go through, do we think we're going to see a massive uptick in claims around redundancy processes or how this has been handled? Do we see the advent of a load more litigation once we're a bit closer to the end of lockdown, do you think?
I think so. I think as organisations are starting to, as we start to merge from lockdown, then I think that may be happening. I think because we don't have any end in sight at the moment as well. Matt Hancock unhelpfully said that he wasn't able to say when we're going to be able to get out of this. So I don't think that's the sort of message that businesses want to hear right now. And I can imagine there are quite a few businesses and football clubs, rugby clubs at the moment looking at, well, can we really continue to weather this storm when we're picking up these employer costs? And then, of course, the second part of the answer is it depends in terms of how many claims we see coming through. Depends if employers do the sensible thing and responsible thing and take considered legal advice before they make decisions. If they don't, if they get it wrong, either substantively, that they don't get it right, that it's a genuine redundancy situation, and or procedurally, then they may be in trouble. The other argument with furlough, of course, is there may be an argument for employees to say that, well, if you could continue to furlough me for that period, is it a genuine redundancy situation?
Yeah. And so if that's the case, then are we better, if you're a club, do you want to be thinking more about maybe looking to change your current T's and C's of employment with your staff around the pay, around the working hours, to avoid what could potentially be quite a risky process?
Yeah, it's another option. Yeah, in a word, yes, provided that, again, procedures are, I don't want to labour the point, but where organisations end up in tribunal is when they haven't followed the procedures, for a little bit of time, a little bit of attention to detail, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and you can save yourself a whole lot of exposure to liability. Now, we do appreciate that regardless of the financial pressures that clubs are under, they may very well be reluctant to lose valued members of staff that are considered part of the club's family. So it does form a useful alternative to letting trusted and valued staff go that your club may want to explore simply making changes to contractual working arrangements in order to save costs. I know Arsenal did that last August when they went through a similar exercise. They were looking to do that rather than go down the termination route with everyone. So in terms of the changes they could make, that could include salary reductions, changing working patterns for those returning to the workplace, the number of days that they're at work, hours of work, reducing or increasing hours of work, and of course looking at working from home, because that's worked very effectively for some people. That may save costs. There are a number of pitfalls, though, for the unwary employer when amending terms and conditions of employment for existing employees. As a starting point, clubs should check the contracts of employment of any affected staff to see if there is anything in the contract that says the club can vary specific terms of employment, such as rates of pay, the hours worked, hours of the day worked. Legally, this is known as a flexibility or variation clause or term. You should check the flexibility clause wording to see what you as a club can specifically change, if you need to give any notice to make a change, and if you need to follow a certain process to make that change. Now, even if a change is covered by a flexibility clause, it is still a good idea to talk to the employees before deciding to make a change. It's good to talk. Communication, I'm very evangelical about this when I talk to my clients. Communication is the key, and a lot of things can go wrong and relationships can sour for a lack of communication. But I think employees recognise that we are living in unprecedented times. As an alternative to being made redundant, they will be more receptive to a change being made to their terms and conditions of employment. It's important that in talking to staff, clubs use tact, diplomacy, explaining the financial situation. That can go a long way to implementing a change that meets the needs of the club and works for both parties, and can avoid things getting out into social media as well, employees getting very upset about things. Now, if the contract of employment doesn't offer sufficient scope to make changes required, then they will need to consult with the affected employees. That consultation word again is key on an individual basis. Now, if they were making changes to terms and conditions on a more collective basis, where there are 20 or more staff involved, then they will necessarily have to go through consultation, particularly if the alternative, if they won't accept the changes, then the employer may be looking to terminate their contracts and or re-engage them on a new contract employment. The other legal requirement is that if the agreed changes are to anything like job title, job description, job location, pay, working hours, holiday, changes to collective agreements, then as a matter of law, the club must notify the employee of the change in writing within a month of the change taking place. So it's all really important. Where the employee won't accept the change, as I say, then the route that the club would need to go down if they're determined to introduce a change would be to terminate the contract of employment on notice and to re-engage that employee on a new contract. Now, the risk there is that the employee could reject that new contract and then bring a claim of unfair dismissal. But that is a risk that clubs may feel that they have to take. But I would suggest that termination and re-engagement ought to be considered very much as a last resort, therefore, because of the exposure it could bring to a club. Far more preferable, as a matter of best employment law practice and procedure, to keep talking as a matter of good publicity as well, to avoid adverse publicity, to try keep talking and agree with, make your staff understand that this is a necessary evil. But it may be a short-term thing, and it may be that things could be revised in the future. But the important thing is legal advice needs to be taken so as to avoid the pitfalls and bear traps for the unwary club.
Well, we've kept talking, and your flexibility when I dropped my pen earlier is very much appreciated. But as far as you're concerned, well, that's true. As far as you're concerned, then, what do you think I think we know what they're going to be, but what are your one or two maybe key takeaways for clubs when they're thinking about their staffing levels? Or what message do you want to leave clubs with at the end of this discussion?
Okay, I think it's all in the planning. I think clubs need to be looking at their financial situation now, which I'm sure they are, and looking at what changes they could make, but they shouldn't just press a nuclear button, by which I mean termination. There are other options, and it is worth talking to us about what those options are. Certainly, it's worth understanding the legal position in terms of what you're trying to achieve. I mean, we're very good at working with employers in working with them to understand what they want to achieve out of a situation and building them a roadmap of how to get there. And in doing that, taking into account all the different permutations and factors, in particular that if you're a football or rugby club, then you're high profile, and it's really important that you are seen, you're squeaky clean and seen to be doing things correctly, both from the point of view of having good staff morale going forward, and also in terms of the badge of your club. That's really important in terms of the hard-fought reputation that's got.
It's a great point. When you think about your stakeholders, it's not just internal, it's external. And when you've got a lot of, members of the wider public very concerned about the ethics of any business, never mind any sports club, and they feel like they've bought into it, they're going to want to feel that people within the club are being treated fairly and treated properly. And it's never a process that leaves anybody particularly happy.
Yeah.
But it's a process that hopefully you can manage, and I think that's as good a message as anything else to end on. So I think that's where we'll end. Julian, if people are looking for you, where do they find you online? How do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, they can find me very easily. My email address is julian.cox@blmlaw.com, or via LinkedIn, or they can give me a call. Simply call me. I'm very personable. I like talking, as you know, Steve.
You do.
I like the sound of my own voice, and I like listening to other people's problems and trying to help them solve them. So the telephone number is 075 25 61 8363.
That's perfect. Well, guys, thanks very much for your attention. We'll be in touch shortly to introduce you to other members of the Beyond Sport team and to hopefully give you some more valuable content. But until next time, we'll talk to you shortly.